Thank you, Rajashri, for that very generous introduction. Very generous indeed. It's a kind of introduction that my late father would have been proud of, but only my mother would have believed. Now, Mr. Ramani mentioned my visit here 4 years ago when I had an opportunity to go around and not only seeing CDAC at work, but also looking at some of your products. I remember sitting in and trying to pilot your solar-powered auto rickshaw. But even before that, a couple of years before that, I've stood in this very hall and lectured the staff. Now, don't ask me what it was about, but it certainly wasn't the first of a series. So I want to compliment you all for organizing a distinguished lecture series and giving me the honor of delivering the first one. What I thought I'd do as a proud Indian with an abiding faith in India's global destiny is to speak about India's potential in research and innovation, where we can be a powerhouse in the 21st century. CDAC's own work recognizes the importance of research in India's economic resurgence. For too long, we've had a complacent view of the role of R&D in driving economic growth. The fact is that even prosperity and social justice require, in my view, a strong R&D foundation. To me, it's a matter of grave concern and discomfort that a civilization which was at the forefront of both scientific thought and manufacturing as late as the 17th century today contributes a measly 2.1% of the global R&D expenditure. Why should a country with 17% of the world's brains, because we have 17% of the world's population, produce only 2% of the world's research output? A few numbers illustrate the problem. India's growth rate of scientific research publication, thank you, during 2006 to 10, which is the last number I could get, was 12% against the world average of 4%. This is the growth rate in our scientific research publication, which means that our share in global research publication increased from 2.2% in 2000 to 3.5% in 2010. However, as per the research and development statistics published by our own Department of Science and Technology, the number of researchers per 1 million people, which is a commonly accepted figure worldwide, in India is still 164 in comparison to China's 863. So they have 863 researchers per million head of population. We have only 164. Brazil has 668, much smaller country than us. Russia has 3,117 researchers per million. And Singapore, anyone wants to guess? 6,000 per million. So if you look at those numbers, and then I took 2012-13, the last year for which I could find patent numbers. A total of 43,674 patents were filed in India, but only 22.69% of those were filed by Indians. The rest were by foreigners and foreign companies. The total manpower employed in research and development establishments in science and technology across the country is 192,819, just under 2 lakhs. However, women constitute only 14.2% of the total workforce, with just 27,000 researchers. That's why I'm so pleased to see such a phalanx of women in CDAC, and I hope that the percentage here is definitely higher than the national level. Now, this unacceptably low level of research and development surely has a correlation with India's relatively low share in global manufacturing and trade. The situation persists even as the national passion for jugaad, to use a North Indian word, has attracted international attention from management experts as a valid approach to economic efficiency and innovation. In 2011, I inaugurated the India Innovation Center at the University of Toronto. So a foreign university was studying Indian innovation. The buzzword then was Indovation, for innovation from India. If you do a Google search for the term frugal innovation, the top 20 results all feature India. At one level, this is not new. Companies have long realized the opportunities that lie in meeting demands at the bottom of the pyramid, so-called, that have previously been overlooked. India is the country that invented the shampoo sachet more than 2 decades ago, creating a market for a product that historically the poor had never been able to afford because the cost of a whole bottle was beyond their reach. Indians who don't have either the space or the money in their homes to buy a whole bottle of shampoo for 100 rupees could spend 5 rupees. I'm talking of prices in those days for a sachet they'd use once or twice. So repackage the product and you find a whole new market. But India's path-breaking leadership in frugal innovation goes beyond downsizing. It involves taking the needs of poor consumers, itself a term no one had used before, since who knew the poor could be consumers, as a starting point and working backwards. I think we have quite a distraction going on with that demonstration. Nothing we can do, I suppose. Are you able to concentrate on what I'm saying, or are the cries of Zindabad certainly distracting me from my own words? But anyway, so it involves taking the needs of poor consumers as a starting point and working backwards. Instead of complicating or refining their products, Indian innovators have been stripping products down to their bare essentials, making them affordable, accessible, durable, and effective. Indians are, to that degree, natural leaders in frugal innovation, imbued as they are with the so-called Jugaad system of developing makeshift but workable solutions from limited resources. Jugaad is probably an untranslatable Hindi word, but it's kind of a way of life, a philosophy that essentially conveys the quality of somehow making do with what you have to meet your needs. But it's not about pirating products or just making cheap imitations of global brands. It is about innovation in that there is the finding of inexpensive solutions, often improvised on the fly, within the constraints of a resource-starved developing country that's full of poor people. So an Indian villager constructs a makeshift vehicle to transport his livestock and goods by rigging a wooden cart with an irrigation hand pump that serves as an engine. Now that's Jugaad. Common machines and household objects are reincarnated in ways that their original manufacturers had not intended. Everything is reusable or reimaginable. If you have a cell phone and can't afford to pay the bills, you invent the concept of the missed call. So that signals that you need someone to call you back. The Indian ingenuity has produced a startling number of world-beating innovations. Despite its commercial failure, I think the Tata Nano is one of them, which, when it was launched, sold for roughly the cost of a high-end DVD player in a Western luxury car. Of course, there's no DVD player in the Nano and no radio either in the basic model, but its innovations have gathered 34 patents. And they're not merely the result of doing away with frills, including doing away with power brakes, air conditioning, and even side view mirrors, but such design choices as reducing the use of steel by inventing an aluminium engine, increasing space by moving the wheels to the edge of the chassis, inventing a modular design that enables a car to be assembled from kits, all proved conclusively that you could do less with more. Then there's the Mac 400, a handheld electrocardiogram device that costs the equivalent of about $800, whereas the cheapest alternative anywhere else in the world is over $2,000. There's the Tata Swatch, a $24 water purifier, which is 10 times cheaper than its nearest international competitor. The electrocardiogram uses just 4 buttons instead of the usual dozen, and a tiny portable ticket machine style printer which makes it small enough to fit into a satchel and even run on batteries. So this micro product has reduced the cost of an ECG, an electrocardiogram, to about $1 per patient. Unthinkable in the Western world. The Swatch purifier uses rice husks, which, as you know, is amongst our country's most common waste products, to purify water. Given that some 5 million Indians die of cardiovascular diseases every year, more than a quarter of them under 65, and about 2 million die from drinking contaminated water, the value of such an innovation becomes apparent. Now, there are many other examples of frugal innovation already in the market. There's a low-cost fuel-efficient mini truck. There's an inexpensive mini tractor being sold profitably, including in the US. There's a battery-powered refrigerator. There's a cheap electricity inverter and a solar lamp that costs about $12. Medical innovations are also widespread. An Indian company has invented a cheaper hepatitis B vaccine, which brought the price down from about the equivalent of $15 per injection to less than 10 cents, so 150 times less. Insulin's price has come down by 40%, thanks to innovation by an Indian biotech firm. And a Bangalore firm has invented a diagnostic tool to test for TB and infectious diseases that costs some $200 versus comparable equipment in the Western world, which retails for $10,000. So $200 versus $10,000. That's the kind of difference. And of course, even in the financial sector, we've seen innovation. Okay, just 3 years ago, there were only 15 million bank accounts in a country of 1.2 billion people. And obviously, it was smart to realize if Indians won't come to the banks, if people won't come to the banks, let the banks go to the people. And the result was the creation of traveling tellers with handheld devices who have converted the living rooms of village homes into makeshift branches and taking deposits as low as 50 rupees. Now, frugal innovation points to one of the reasons why there is more dynamism in the Indian economy than the conventional negatives might suggest. But I would argue it's still not enough. We have to do better than simplifying products and ideas that have already been invented elsewhere. We need original thinking and new Indian-made products. We are the nation that invented the zero. We can't today go around inventing zero. Inventing nothing. We need to come up with more. Now, the importance of research and development as the prime driver of economic growth cannot be overemphasized. We live in a post-industrial world that some have called the age of information. All the challenges that India faces in the 21st century, from securing enough food and water for our burgeoning population, to managing the explosive growth of our urban spaces, from tackling malnutrition and poverty to eradicating disease and illiteracy, are unprecedented in their scale and scope. We have no choice but to find solutions very rapidly, very effectively, and very equitably. It will only be done if we as a nation embrace and adopt a work culture that gives preeminence to research and innovation in every possible way. Now, in 2012, as per the OECD data, globally around 1.14 trillion US dollars was spent on research and development. The US accounted for 33.6% of this expenditure, while Europe claimed 24.5%. People think Europe is stagnating. They spent 24.5%, a quarter of the total global expenditure on research and development. China and Japan each 12.6%. India, as I said earlier, was just 2.1%. Of this, the government of India took the lion's share of the R&D expenditure, 75 to 80%. Only 20 to 25% was spent by private players, and universities in our country accounted for only 3%. Now, I mentioned these figures, bear them in your mind, because I want you to compare them to the rest of the OECD countries, the Western world. There, private companies, the private sector spends 69% of research and development expenditure. 18% was spent by the universities versus 3% in our country, okay? 10% only was spent by governments and 3% by non-profit organizations. So if you add the non-profits to the private companies, that is 72% expenditures in the private sector, whereas it's barely 20% in India. This is why when I was minister, I challenged the private sector to spend more money on research. They are getting away by essentially relying on government alone to do everything. FDI in India in R&D is about $500 million a year, which is very little indeed in global terms. If you take 2011, for example, 20 R&D centers and 13 headquarters were brought to India, which was just 2% of the total foreign direct investment gained by the country that year. Clearly, we need to increase both private sector spending on R&D, as well as increase FDI in R&D. Since India's expenditure on research in science and technology is an insignificant 0.88% of our GDP, whereas most developed countries spend more than 2% of their GDP on research, The 2% target, it's clear now, after so many prime ministers have promised it and never fulfilled it, will only be possible if the private sector raises its R&D investment to at least match the public sector's investment. In fact, what I heard about CDAC's funding problems are not encouraging in that regard, because to go down to 1/3 of the money you were getting from the previous government is truly calamitous. But we need, it seems to me, not only for the government to rectify that, which as your MP I will try and fight for, but also to get the private sector to step up to the plate. Now, I do want to say that silver linings are not absent from these clouds. A 2005 Wharton report stated that research and development in India could be showcased as a 3-act play. The first act would see advanced development for products. The second act would enthrall the world with basic research, software engineering and development to support other labs and so on. And then the third and final act would see American and European enterprises move to India, making it an R&D powerhouse. There's a need in India to understand that the production of knowledge and innovation is absolutely the key to creating economic strength in this globalized world, which in turn will impact on our political prowess. Now, India has established its strength in information technology, IT-enabled services, and business process outsourcing for a while now. Multinational corporations and homegrown companies are setting up R&D centers in the country, hoping to tap the vast educated workforce in India, which is committed to making their own lives better and contributing to a better tomorrow. This workforce is young, dynamic, with strong technical and managerial skills, and able to deliver products for the global consumer. While lower costs were the initial attraction to India, it's actually now more and more the current skill set of India's workforce, particularly of our engineers. And you are all a very good example of this here at CDAC, who have improved in their ability to contribute to innovation. And that's what's its quality and innovation that's bringing the multinational corporations here. Talent is, after all, abundant in India. We are amongst the top 3 scientific manpower nations in the world, or human power, with respect to the ladies here. And that's why already companies like GE, Philips, IBM have more researchers in India than in their parent countries. Our research and development enterprises are now ambitiously moving towards such fields as pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, in addition to IT, while keeping a stronghold in traditional spheres like Ayurveda. Research in Ayurveda could be a very interesting new development in the healthcare side. Now, other sectors also need to catch up. I mean, our country is and should be especially attractive for the automobile industry, in particular thanks to the existence of skilled labor with sound technical knowledge, low cost of essential supplies, aided by, of course, the great demand for cars in the domestic market. According to Ernst & Young, corporations increasingly are looking towards India to manufacture and assemble cars here, and we could even overtake Thailand, which at the moment holds the #1 spot in this. If we increase our focus on R&D, India could position itself on the top of the ladder in the global automotive story. News reports have mentioned that about 700 multinational corporations are planning to bring their R&D centers to India, while many of the multinational corporations are choosing to combine their innovation networks with R&D operations, which will fuel business models meant exclusively for, these are business models tried out in India which can be used in other emerging markets. And of course, the idea is to create solutions which are sustainable yet affordable, not just in India, but can be marketed around the world. I mentioned the GE, the General Electric company, which has its largest single R&D facility outside the US in India, out of a 50-acre campus in Bangalore. And then IBM's Spoken Web project operates out of New Delhi. Microsoft has had a center in Bangalore since 2005. Hewlett-Packard's R&D center is also in Bangalore, where they're creating technology which will recognize human gestures without the need to use a keyboard. That's pretty advanced now, I understand. One of the oldest R&D centers, however, was established by Motorola back in 1991. And now we're seeing in Pune as well as in Bangalore, a lot more centers coming up, ranging from Zurich Insurance to the French car maker Peugeot, German sealing technology provider Eagle Bergman, the Dutch conglomerate Royal DSM, and so on. So companies are coming in, and now we've heard in manufacturing, which is not research and innovation, but just in straightforward manufacturing, we're hearing about the arrival of Foxconn into this country, which potentially could also transform. And once they get manufacturing going, they will see the advantage of doing the research for their manufacturing here as well. There's no question that our young people are both cost competitive and brain competitive when it comes to results, and so we can really tap into this untapped consumer demand in the international markets. But I have to admit that with the missing infrastructure, the lack of funding we talked about, the lack of enough research laboratories, India is not able to optimally capitalize on its human resources and on its potential. We in the UPA government created the National Innovation Council in 2010. They tried to create industrial clusters, created a fund worth $1 billion. The idea was to create an ecosystem for innovation to further increase our R&D capabilities in India, and done in association with industry. But unfortunately, the NDA government has closed the National Innovation Council and taken so far no steps to replace it with a body playing a similar role. In my view, the government should do that. It should also introduce schemes to promote researchers and research publications in the fields of science and technology, and particularly for women researchers and scientists. I gave you the numbers earlier of how few we have, and there is no question that we should introduce measures to increase the private sector's share in the country's expenditure of R&D as well, including perhaps by providing tax incentives to companies and multinational corporations to promote their research and development activities in our country. The government, of course, has a fundamental role in creating the R&D infrastructure for our country. If you look at the 12th five-year plan, we tried to create an innovative ecosystem in the country towards raising research and development share in national expenditure, creating indigenous capacities to attract and absorb FDI, raising manufacturing industry's contribution to 25% of GDP, and raising technology and value-added exports. Frankly, one doesn't know the status of the plan in the present dispensation, but these objectives need to be fulfilled. Keeping international trends in context, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research has identified more core areas where R&D will be developed. These include affordable healthcare, sustainable energy, chemistry and environment, smart and functional materials, engineering, structures and designs, and earth system sciences. You know, it's interesting that 90% of the American patents granted to any publicly funded R&D organization in the US have been given to CSIR, an Indian public sector company. India's CSIR has become a leader in filing patents in this space. And the fact is that 9% of its patents have been licensed, which is well above the global average. I suspect that CDAC's figures will be quite comparable. 3 to 4% of the total scientific staff in the country, CSIR accounts for 11% of the total scientific output, which makes it a very prolific institution. Now, if you were to take India's role in BRICS as a whole, it's interesting to see that the BRICS countries have all increased their expenditure on R&D, but it's still below the standards of countries like the USA or Germany. Within BRICS, China is the leader. They have gone in a very big way, including with private investment in research and development. And the laws in China actually even permit monopolies through property rights and intellectual property rights. I would say that there's a lot of potential here to improve it, but the fact is that while the total scientific output from BRICS has increased from 9% in 1996 to 21% in 2009, and I don't have more recent figures. I'm sure the BRICS summit coming up will give us those numbers. The fact is, I have no doubt that we're still behind Western Europe and the US in terms of a percentage of global research and innovation. Nonetheless, McKinsey published a report in 2011 which states that the BRICS countries really do give multinational corporations a tremendous opportunity to enhance their research and development thanks to the lower costs associated with the BRICS countries. And it's striking, according to McKinsey, 2/3 of the corporations which have invested themselves in these emerging markets have firmly focused on either global product platforms or local innovation in emerging economies rather than doing research and development only for their own developed markets. This means that development costs are also coming down because you're making money locally where you are. Now, we know that the challenges to make India an R&D powerhouse are many. The McKinsey study further brought to the forefront an issue with research and development in the emerging markets. That is, managers responsible for research and development, they argue, lack efficiency. Decision-making is very often centralized in our countries, while dispersing information on research is not effectively done. And that managers in emerging economies who work on research and development, relatively speaking, are seen by McKinsey as lacking leadership and communication skills when compared to their counterparts in developed economies. However, they are ranked higher than developed country managers when it comes to understanding the local business environment and having local knowledge. So there's a trade-off, but nonetheless, these are all things that also need to be remedied. While we plan to boost research and development across the board, we also need to do it in the education sector. There's no question that in comparison with other developing nations, our country lags behind in the quality of our technical colleges and centers promoting vocational education. You've all seen President Pranab Mukherjee repeatedly expressing concern that no Indian university can be found in any of the global lists of the top 200 universities in the world. Fact is, when I was minister, we got a briefing from the Times Higher Education ranking. They are the most prominent and well-known of the international rankings. And when they explain the weightage they give to their rankings, 30% of the points in ranking a university are given on the basis of research. A further 30% is given on the basis of citations in internationally respected journals. But citations are always of published research. So basically, without a strong research foundation, 60% of the marks are gone for any Indian university even before they begin to compete. And then they have other challenges such as lack of internationalization because of the number of demands of our own students and the job seekers amongst faculty. We don't have international faculty, we don't have international students. That also drops our ranking internationally. So these are all factors that come in and affect us negatively. But part of the problem is that our universities tend to be teaching institutions where little research is done, and our research takes place in specialized centers where little teaching is done. And so our universities don't really get very good rankings, and I think we have to change this. The government of the UPA, in which I participated, did try to finance research clusters around the country, and as I said, to double the share of GDP on research to 2%, but this has never come close to fulfillment. In fact, the NDA government's budget allotted a mere 99 crores to international cooperation in science and technology, with a 1% increase in the previous budget in that sector. But when you look at the actual expenditure on research and development across the board, I'm afraid, thank you so much. I'm afraid that the expenditure has been slashed, and CDAC is a major victim, but not the only victim of these amazing cuts across the board that the government has done. Now, to develop research and innovation, we need to understand the importance of patents and of intellectual property, because the intellectual property regime does pose hurdles in this area. It's historically been an important aspect in driving the economy up. In most developed economies, that's been the story. The Patents Amendment Act of 2005 in India made our patent laws TRIPS compliant, that's trade-related intellectual property compliant. But for the first time since 1970, we had allowed patents for pharmaceuticals, food, and agrochemicals. But of course, we do examine each application very substantively for patentability. We feel that controversial measures that required a new inventive step as a criterion for patentability were worth putting into the law. We have done so. Not everyone likes it. At the same time, a more liberal framework for compulsory licensing of certain essential products has also been put in. Now, with stronger IPR laws, companies are usually emboldened to do more R&D. So if the law is solid, companies will feel secure in coming in and doing research, while attracting, of course, far more work from multinational corporations into India. And I would say that many of the increases we've seen in innovation work since 2005 is directly thanks to the internationally more acceptable patent law that we have created. IPR is important in this day and age due to the intense global competition, the risks which come with innovation, the short product cycle, because people keep inventing new products that make older ones obsolete. I don't know how many of you, parents must have cherished the old tape recorders, and then the cassette recorder came along, and now the cassette recorder has been supplanted by the DVD player, and soon we'll all have stacks of DVDs we can't use because everything will be on an MP3 thumb drive, and so it goes. So products have very short cycles. The weight of the investment that is made towards R&D is also quite significant, and the quickness with which technology keeps moving ahead, and the marketing and human resources you have to invest in these enterprises, all of them make IPR a necessary underpinning. A solid and structured regime will invite greater investments from abroad, from global multinationals, and it seems to me that if we have an intellectual property system that's friendly to innovation, we will get more money coming into innovation. The Planning Commission has, of course, noted we must follow the open source innovation policy and promote IP acquisition by the government for non-exclusive licensing for public and social good in our country, because sustainable and faster and more inclusive growth remains a fundamental objective of any Indian government. But in doing this, it seems to me that we have to seriously think about our own ambitions of becoming a technology-based, what I want to do, however, is to ensure that our brains remain in India. We've had a fair number of scientific talent leaving the country at a time when they felt the facilities were not there for research and innovation in India. That is no longer true. It seems to me that we now have that capacity here. I remember when I was minister visiting IIT Indore, where they had this amazing telescope that is doing some extremely sophisticated investigation of the skies in astrophysics. It's a breakthrough. There are only 2 such telescopes in the entire world, and one of them was in Indore. The professor in charge of this was a NRI who had tenure at a prestigious American university and gave it up to come and lead the project in India, and introduced me to his team of young doctoral candidates working with him, or postdocs as well. And one of them, a young Muslim boy from the Indore area, he had 7 full scholarships from the 7 top universities in America, including Caltech, MIT, and so on. And he turned them all down to work with this Indian professor in IIT Indore on the same kind of project. So, to my mind, this is a very encouraging development, that people don't feel that they need to go abroad, because they can do at home in India what their passion, their intellectual and research passion, drives them to do. Now, the fact is that the Indian diaspora has always been a major point of dissemination of technology, including back here. So I don't want to complain about the brain drain. It's also been a brain gain for us. But my worry is that we should not have inadequacies in our infrastructure here that could let people believe that avenues for research are better elsewhere. So we must improve the research level in universities, which is certainly happening but needs to happen much more. Create, it seems to me, engineers and managers who have built-in experience in research and innovation in the course of their studies at our universities, and at the same time create enthusiasm amongst the educators. We've just had Teachers' Day. educators and teachers must encourage people to invest in research and innovation. This will, in my view, transform our country if, instead of educators taking the line that what they teach in the classroom is what the student must regurgitate in the examination, which is unfortunately the way in which much of our pedagogy takes place. If instead they value and reward original thinking, creative thinking and innovation, we would actually be able to transform, it seems to me, our country for the better. I talk about the classroom sometimes, and when I speak to audiences much younger than yourselves, school audiences in particular, I give them the example of what I'm wearing around my neck as an example of out-of-the-box thinking. This whole thing happened when I was complaining after I'd gone through a 3-month period when I lost or broke 6 pairs of glasses in 3 months, because I only need them about 5% of the day for distance. I don't need them to look at notes. I don't need them to see you all and talk to you. But for distance or for driving or from a back row of a movie theater, I need glasses. And when I didn't need them, I never wore them. Blame it on vanity or whatever. But I would shove them into a pocket, bang into a wall, they would break, or I'd be sitting down. There's no pant pockets in a munda, as you know, so you put them on your lap, you get up, they fall down, somebody steps on them, they break, or I leave them somewhere and forget them. So with this, I ended up essentially running through glasses like anything. So I said to a friend, what a terrible thing. Why hasn't anybody made glasses in any different way since the 19th century? I mean, for the last 200 years, pretty much, everybody wears glasses which hang on your ear and are joined at the center and have to be on your face whether you want them or not. And this friend said, let me see if we can find a solution. And he came back a few months later, this is a couple of years ago now, with this. So this hangs around my neck. I don't have to lose it or mislay it or leave it in a pocket or put it on a lap or anything. And then when I really want to see who's sitting in the back row, all I have to do is click it into place with 2 magnets in the middle. I can say hello, talk to you, then take it off again and continue looking at my notes. Now, the interesting thing about this is purely that we have so often been content with received wisdom. That is, that something has always been done a certain way. Very often in India, how often have you as parents been guilty of telling your children, when they say, why do we have to do this? You say, because that's the way it's done. Well, I'm sorry, that things don't always have to be that way. And this is simply perhaps a trivial example of how one can reimagine a product that we all take for granted, or our generations have taken for granted for 200 years. Similarly, we can reimagine and repurpose ourselves if we only encourage more creative thinking and behavior in our classrooms. So let me conclude. We're all like Egyptian mummies. We're strapped for time. So research and development, research and innovation require time to flourish. Connecting the dots between industrial needs, the market needs, and the academic curriculum and the workload of innovation in centers like yourselves, those dots must be connected effectively. Research begins with the academic environment, but it must be fostered with industrial needs that understand consumer needs. Both these interests in isolation cannot function optimally. They need to be connected. And to my mind, getting corporations to come forward and combine with academic institutions to create better R&D outcomes is part of the way forward. So Yahoo India have paired up with the Triple IT, the Indian Institute of Information Technology in Hyderabad, to accelerate R&D in cloud computing. Xerox Corporation launched a program called India Innovation with IIT Mumbai, IIT Kharagpur and Srishti International Labs, while using online platforms, social networking and crowdsourcing for its projects. And so we need to create much more of this exchange between academia and industry, while of course taking care to ensure that these processes are accountable to some sort of supervision. They don't just go completely commercial. An educational institution is still an educational institution and not a profit-making lab alone. But I'm convinced this will fund and thereby help raise the higher standards we need for research. If we want India to be an economic giant, we must build up our research and innovation capabilities. Enhancing this requires creativity, which we must encourage in the classroom. while competing with countries that have built up an impressive record of technological achievement, we must enter the zone of high-end technology, and this will only happen if we stop imitative or extrapolative inventions and go for genuine innovation, where we come up with new things, new products, new ways of doing things. We also need to have multiple R&D facilities throughout the country. With Sam Pitroda leading the way, I had tried to set up a knowledge city in Trivandrum, which is, after all, a city with a solid ecosphere for research in diverse fields, a concentration of research scholars in one area who can benefit from synergy with each other, with people like you and others. But now Trivandrum is not even on the list of so-called smart cities chosen by the government. And why? Because of the absurd bureaucratic reason that they're only considering what they call statutory towns as opposed to census towns. So according to them, there are only 2 towns in Kerala, Trivandrum and Cochin, and only one can get R&D. Can only get smart city status. Whereas if you look at the census towns in terms of population and density of population, practically every village in Kerala qualifies as a town by comparison. We should be having 20 smart cities, but this is the mentality of the bureaucracy. I've not given up pursuing this, but it shows the lack of understanding and vision of those who make political decisions on such matters. So we need that. We need the government to think imaginatively. We need government support and funding. We need a multidisciplinary approach towards research and innovation. We need world-class educational institutions with an ability to think innovatively. We have a young workforce, a thriving and I hope increasingly influential scientific community, which inspires our policy making and, of course, the development of our science and technology capabilities. If we can add to that private enterprises committed to R&D and, of course, an IPR regime which is WTO compliant, I believe we can be an extremely attractive destination that will create world-class centers in research and development. CDAC has been a very good example of good, creative, productive, usable research and development in your fields. I certainly hope that you will get the funding you deserve, both from the government and from the private sector, and that you will be a pioneer in blazing the path towards creating a new paradigm for research and innovation in our country. I wish you all great success. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind. It might be of interest to you. I think